All right, Sagar, what's on your radar?
Well, at least somebody over at the New York Times is being fair to Bernie Sanders, but interestingly enough, it is conservative columnist Ross Douthat in a column that shook political Twitter titled The Case for Bernie. Douthat notes that the relative weakness of Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg, along with the failures of party establishment favorites like Kamala Harris, by pointing out that while Sanders has a core demographic support amongst the young, he also has near second-choice preference amongst older voters, female voters, minority voters, and other demographic groups that make up the Democratic coalition. Critically, Douthat points out that some of Sanders' most crossover support of any Democratic candidate, especially those voters who are in the top tier, far more than Elizabeth Warren. Now, this is something the media just can't wrap their heads around because they legitimately believe that Warren is just Bernie Sanders populism dressed up with actual plans. But Warren has decided to marry economic populism with far cultural leftism, from adding gender pronouns to her Twitter bio, making fun of people who don't believe in gay marriage, and a whole host of radical social plans that she features on her website. Now, Sanders, conversely, as Douthat writes, is a, quote, economic policy monomaniac. There's no denying Bernie is probably just as socially liberal, if not more so, than Elizabeth Warren. But his appeal to crossover voters is that, quote, Sanders' socialism might be strangely reassuring as a signal of what he actually cares about and what battles he might eschew for the sake of his anti-plutocratic goals. This again comes down to a critical issue of trust. Bernie's resilience in the polls, his massive number of committed voters in the primary, is based upon the fact every single one of them trusts that he will do exactly what he has been saying for almost 40 years. He will target the healthcare industry and he'll target the financial industry aggressively. That alone is enough fights for an entire 8-year presidency. Just ask FDR. So what Douthat gets so right in this analysis is that voters understand what you do as president is a zero-sum game. When you're pushing one thing or you're preoccupied with another, that is every single day that you're not doing something else. Elizabeth Warren has showed her cards to voters. She released a fake pay-for scheme on Medicare for All. Then she said she's not even going to try and pass it until year 3 of her presidency. What exactly is she going to be doing in those first 3 years? Look, I'm sure financial fights would have some of it, but a bigger feeling that given the congressional situation that she's going to be dealing with, it is mostly going to be woke liberal versions of the travel ban executive order that would rip this country in half. Now, people can sense this. That is why Warren has fared the worst of the top 3 candidates in the 6 battleground states in head-to-head matchups done by the New York Times against President Donald Trump. And Douthat ultimately finds himself with a very interesting conclusion. Quote, despite technically preferring a moderate like Biden or Amy Klobuchar, I keep coming back to the conservatives' case for Bernie, which rests on the perhaps wrong but still attractive supposition that he's the liberal most likely to spend all of his time trying to tax the rich and leave cultural conservatives alone. I won't indulge that fantasy too far. I don't think Bernie himself would lean too far into many of these social justice issues, but conservatives learned under President Obama, even under a man who opposed gay marriage when elected to the Oval Office, that an executive branch populated with woke social justice warriors can deliver plenty of damage. Now, knowing how personnel are appointed here in Washington, I think it would be all but impossible for Bernie to staff the administration without many in his own White House. But Douthat's column highlights what I believe is the most underserved community in all of America, and what I fight so hard for in the future of the right. Cultural right, economic left. It is the working class of this country that holds on to their traditions and watches them mocked by the very oligarchs who offshored or automated their jobs. And if Bernie was still the guy who said that open borders was a Koch brothers proposal designed to hurt the working class, maybe even moderated a bit on his social issues, I have no doubt he would win in a landslide. In the meantime, the rest of us are left wanting, but perhaps we can glimpse a part of our future in the Sanders revolution. And I think, Crystal, what Douthat highlights there is that, Bernie, it's like I said, I think I and everybody in the elites, we know that Bernie is way more far left on social issues than Elizabeth Warren, right? She used to be a Republican. I mean, he's been out there. He was like preaching gay rights like 45 years ago. But what does he emphasize? What do we think that he would actually do whenever he would come into the White House? And what Douthat is saying is that Bernie seems like a guy economic monomaniac, as he says, who would spend every single day fighting for the working class. And what he would understand more is that once you get there on the economic issues, then you can begin to try and make your cultural case. And that is something that Warren completely does not understand. You talked about that in your own radar, the all-female co-chairs, like all this, like girl power, lean in type candidacy. That is exactly what will undercut your entire economic populist message.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts of this.
Yeah.
First of all, when I read this, I was like, oh my God, somebody actually, I think this guy may have actually talked to a voter outside of New York or D.C. sometime within the last 10 years. It's miraculous because there are all these ossified views and assumptions of who supports Bernie Sanders. I mean, you remember all the conversation about how, Warren and Sanders are competing for the same pool of voters. All you had to do was look at the crosstabs at the very first poll to know that that was not the case, which is something we've obviously been talking about here forever. But this idea continues to be perpetuated in the media because they don't understand what the appeal actually is. So that's number one. Number two, your point about what Warren's presidency is likely to collapse to, I think is so well taken because something I've been talking about for a while is the fact that when you have congressional gridlock, what is the default position? What do you fall back on? And it's basically signaling culturally, rhetorically, or with executive orders or whatever you can to at least rhetorically give some succor to your base, even as you can't actually deliver on their economic needs. So if you are not like a Bernie Sanders willing to go to the mat for the things that you want and have clear set of priorities, that is what Warren or Buttigieg or Biden or whoever's
their entire
presidency is going to collapse
That's
to.
what Obama's presidency looked like, right?
That's right.
Couldn't pass anything after 2010. So what did he do? DACA. All these other executive orders, DAPA, he basically fought the culture war with his pen and his phone. And that is what an Elizabeth Warren presidency would look like. Now, that's the thing about Bernie. I actually legitimately believe that he would not lean into that. He would use his executive orders and his executive power in order to force something in some sort of economic, clash within Congress and monomaniacally focus on making sure that one of these things or two of these things, that's all you really get in life in the presidency, right? It would actually come to bear. I really don't believe that Warren would do it. And I think, again, voters can sense that.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys in the Midwest who are supporting Bernie, the reason that they're doing so is because, look, they're probably not with him on the social issues and even on immigration. But what they're looking at is they're saying, at least this guy might fight for my wages.
Right.
And that is what it really is all about. Now, and I've said it here before. I think if Bernie went back to his 2015 position on immigration and moderated somewhat on social issues or made some grand bargain, I think he would win. I think he'd win 75% of the vote in this country.
Well, look at his fight with Amazon. Right? I think that's a microcosm of how he would govern even in an environment of congressional gridlock. He used the power of basically massive public shaming and mobilization to get Amazon to commit to lifting their wages for workers. Right? I think that is the type of thing you could expect from him. And people know that. It's pretty remarkable. Next up on Rising, we've got a month left in the year.
Congress has a trade deal, impeachment, funding the government left on its agenda. So the Hill's congressional reporter Mike Lillis, he tells us how the Senate and the House plan to get some things done. That's next.